Well, thank you everyone so much for coming. My name is Blake Bell. My association with Howard began back in 2001. At this very show, the germination for the idea for a book called I Have to Live with This Guy that I wrote. And in 2002, I ended up interviewing Howard's husband, Eddie, on what it's like to live with one of those crazy cartoonists. So that produced this book, I Have to Live with This Guy here. And it's been a great association. It was a great time to spend with Eddie and with Howard, getting to know them both. Mostly Eddie telling me all the nightmare stories about Howard. But I think we can, by way of introduction, I think we can safely say that there are few creators in this industry of sequential art that have been ahead of their time as every single step of their career. And we're lucky enough to have one of them here as a Comic-Con special guest. So I'd like you all very much to please give a warm round of applause for Howard Cruse, everyone. How was that for an introduction?
Great.
Well, it's well deserved. Can you give us a bit of history, for those who are unfamiliar, can you give us a bit of history of your growing up and where you grew up?
Okay, I'm an Alabamian. Although I was born in Birmingham at age 4, our family moved out to a small town of 500 people where my father, who was a minister, had a church. And then I was there for about 10 years until my family decided they had to get me out of the Alabama public school system because I was getting depressed. And so I went to a private school named Indian Springs, which was a life-changing experience. It was an experimental school that emphasized thinking for yourself and charting your own course and not taking everything for granted just because authority figures said it. And it helped me make decisions about how to lead my life in a way that was fulfilling as opposed to being all about making the most money possible. Which was a good thing that I got that because that's the way things turned out. I originally thought I would be a newspaper syndication cartoonist. My goal was to have a daily strip of the kinds that I grew up reading. And but then I became interested in theater while I was in college and sort of veered off and spent most of my college years concentrating in theater, particularly playwriting and directing. And I basically left cartoons behind. The daily strips lost their appeal because they were so restricted, and I lost my enthusiasm for the gag strip format. And I think maybe if the continuity strip, like Little Abner, for example, had not faded away, that I might have somehow wound up still doing that, because I became more interested in longer character-oriented stories rather than gags. But basically, newspaper strips turned to gags, comic books turned to superheroes, which I wasn't interested in particularly, and within underground comics came along. And I suddenly became aware of the possibility of bringing some of the goals and ideals that I'd been developing in theater to comic books, and bringing my whole self to comic books. As a gay person, growing up, it always, once I acknowledged to myself that I was gay, it seemed that I would always have to have a compartmentalized life, that there would be my real life, and then there would be my cartooning life, and the cartooning life would not reflect my real life. But underground comics sort of instilled the notion of forgetting about what was socially acceptable and just going for what is true. And it became important to me, particularly in the wake of the Stonewall riots and the birth of the sort of modern branch of the gay liberation movement. I wanted to be part of that, and I wanted to be open about being gay. I also wanted to have a cartoon career that was not limited to the fringes, and so my strategy was to try to establish myself as a cartoonist before coming out, but to come out before it became too tempting not to. And that's pretty much the way it worked out. I had about 5 years of underground comics creation featuring a character. This was back in the 70s, through the middle 70s. I had a character named Barefootz, which looked very different from the comics that people have been seeing from me for the last 30 years. But it was a learning experience, and I had a lot of fun for those characters, and I decided that I wanted one of these characters to be gay. The title character, Barefootz himself, was sort of too not of this earth to quite be gay, but he had this friend, Hedrick, who was an aspiring artist, frustrated artist, and seemed more like me. And I decided he was gay and sort of got him established as a secondary character in the strip, and Barefootz's sidekick, and then introduced the fact in 1976 that he was gay. And then once the sky didn't fall, because I hadn't really come out myself, and I had a gay character. You know, I mean, Gary Trudeau has a gay character, but that didn't mean Gary Trudeau was gay. But once the sky didn't fall, and to taking that step, Dennis Kitchen, the underground comics publisher who had published most of my work, invited me to be the editor of a new series he wanted to start called Gay Comics, which would be a chance for gay and lesbian cartoonists. We weren't saying LGBT quite yet, but the idea was to have it be very inclusive, gender inclusive, could do comics that had some connection to the real lives they were leading. Some people say that Gay Comics was the first gay underground comic book, but that's not true. There was a series called Gay Heartthrobs, going back to about the same time as the Barefootz story in 1976. But it was primarily campy, outrageous sex stuff that didn't really address the kind of life that I was having and many of my friends were having. So the idea was that gay comics would have some roots in reality. I mean, even if the characters were funny animals, they would have some roots in reality. And that was my official coming out, because I knew that no one was going to trust an editor of this gay comic series if they thought he might be straight. They needed someone who was willing to cast their lot with the oppressed group. So that I came out, and fortunately was able to continue having a two-track career. I didn't lose my mainstream clients, illustration clients. I was still invited to do non-gay stories for other publications, but I could also do gay stories. And I think anybody who would follow my work going back to the 70s would have to say that whether or not they liked my work in the 70s, the quality level jumped when I came out, because there's nothing like honesty to give power to art. And for the first time, I was able to be completely myself. And so anyway, then I became known as the big gay cartoonist, but fortunately was able to do other stuff too, and for various magazines, including children's publications. And then I got the chance in 1983 to do the comic strip Wendel, which became a regular feature in The Advocate, which was about a young gay man and his group of gay friends. Thank you very much. By the way, a year from now, there will be a new collection of Complete Wendel. It's being published called, by coincidence, The Complete Wendel. But that's a year from now. I did Wendel through 1989, and then I quit it for assorted reasons. One, I felt I didn't want to do the strip forever, and it was kind of pushed because it became, the economics of maintaining the strip became more and more problematic. Then in 1991, interest was generated in DC Comics through a series of little steps that I won't go through, not wanting to bore you. But it turned out that DC was open to me doing a graphic novel. And I decided this was my opportunity to really delve into the impact it had on me to grow up during the civil rights movement down south, and also to use one of the sort of anomalous episodes in my life from back when I was in college and was trying hard to be straight and wound up being a father. So that always seemed sort of a different angle for a gay novel. I hadn't seen that explored, so it gave me a chance to not just do just another coming out novel. That, along with the civil rights movement, which fitted in well because the actual mother of my daughter was the person who opened my eyes, not to the rightness of the civil rights movement, but to the possibility of street activism, grassroots activism actually having an impact on racial divisions, even in such an incredibly bigoted culture as the South during the 1960s. And so it all dovetailed very well and became Stuck Rubber Baby. And that's the, thank you, that's the, probably more people know me for that, than know me for anything else. And as you may have heard, they just put out this new edition with a new cover art and a new introduction by Alice Bechtel, who wrote Fun Home, wrote and drew Fun Home. And this is the 15th anniversary edition, just came out, and it was interesting to go back and draw Tolan again 15 years later. I had to sort of relearn how to draw. So anyway, that's a somewhat long capsule of mine.
That's a very good capsule. So we're done, everyone. Thanks so much. But I wanted to step back now a little bit.
Okay.
And I wanted to talk, you breezed over the fact that your father was a minister, a Baptist preacher, if I'm not mistaken. What's a lesson that you took away from him that you probably didn't realize until now, or until the last few years?
Well, my dad was not the stereotype that many people think of when they hear the term Southern Baptist preacher. He was, although he had a lot of growing that he needed to do about racial issues, he was a very humane and compassionate person, and he also believed strongly in practicing what you preached, really following your belief system. And so even though I think he would have had to do a lot of wrestling with me coming out as a gay person, he died when I was in college, and last he knew that, he knew I had some conflicts as a teenager, but he thought that was all resolved because I was going with Pam, and but his life ended early. And I think that even though I'm very different from him, that value system of giving priority to doing things that you actually believe in and not allowing yourself to be pushed into not following your belief system, I think that's the thing that I took from my father more than anything else.